1/4 inch.
Okay. 1 centimeter.
And then, yeah, 1 centimeter.
1 centimeter.
And then we'll do, see, I like these right here, but this is too much. It's too deep. It feels like a Lincoln Continental from the 70s. My name is Dave Munson. I am the what do you call it? Owner or CEO or president of Saddleback Leather Company. They're going to lean this up like this, up against the coffin. And right now I'm designing my coffin because I think it's cool. I don't want to have like a Dudley coffin. So my feet will be sticking up here. So wherever the feet are, I can't have the pockets here when they put these down. I can't have the pockets touching my feet. In fact, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, they're gonna have one of my coffins because they're so stinking cool. And they don't have long to go. I'd gone to this funeral recently, and the guy was a really neat guy, and his funeral was like, eh. When I die, I'm gonna have it on like whatever it is, whatever the equivalent of Facebook Live is then. So hopefully millions of people, or probably thousands, hundreds maybe. Let's just say hundreds of people are gonna watch the funeral and they're gonna hear the gospel. But it's gonna lure them in because of my cool coffin. Wouldn't that be super cool? When I was 19, I went on a mission trip and I felt like that is what I want to do the rest of my life. I don't want to waste my life. I want to reach people for the kingdom. I just knew I wanted to do ministry the rest of my life. And then someone came up and said, hey Dave, we really need someone to go down to Mexico to teach English. And I thought, man, that sounds so cool. So think of all the ministry I could do if I were fluent in Spanish. So I headed down to Mexico and I wanted a bag to carry my books. So I found this bag maker named Leonel, and because I couldn't find a bag, I went to him and I said, hey, can you make me a bag? I sketched it out and I said, God, would you help this to be the coolest bag ever? Ever. I want this to be the greatest, coolest bag, and I want you to get more glory from this bag than any other bag that has ever existed on this planet. Why not? I mean, it's free, just like ask. So I did that bag and it came back, and man, everywhere I went, people were going, oh, excuse me, sir, where could I get a bag like that? Where'd you find that bag? How can I get one of these bags? I remember laying on the floor in Juarez. I was like, that'd be cool if I could make this into a real business, you know? Oh yeah, that'd be cool, but I have to do ministry, so I guess I can't do that. I was kind of stupid.
Okay, on this, we could do mini totes. Mini duffels, mini duffels.
Okay. Well, what about the medium size one?
Great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't want any of this on it.
No.
None.
No.
I think we used it all up, guys.
Yep.
I really don't understand why your faith has to be separate. God cares about beauty. He cares.
God makes and creates beautiful things. And so we use really good, high quality materials.
We spend a lot more on our materials because we want things to last.
Everything God does is quality, no exceptions.
We are all about quality. We are all about reaching people, loving on people. And the business has allowed us to speak into people's lives that I know we would have never had the opportunity to do that. People see us on social media, people contact me, and it opens a door to be able to love on people very easily.
I was having a lot of fun on social media. I didn't see it as a ministry, as a way to influence. I was just seeing it as a way to interact with our customers. Since then, we've had a lot of people say, hey, I hate Christians. And I think that you guys are like probably Christians, I think. And I like you guys.
Hola.
Hola. Buenos
¿Cómo
días.
estás? ¿Cómo
Bien,
estás?
Gracias a Dios. ¿Y tú?
Muy
¿Cómo
bien.
estás?
He's 2 months old. I think he looks like Mama. Early on, I was like, we need to do something for the workers here and give them a place to drop their babies free. Don't ask for anything, but then also for these kids to be educated there and to get great food and to be loved on and to learn about Jesus, learn about God. So we opened a daycare.
We put the daycare in place, and this guy says, "Why did you do that?" He was like, "Please, I gotta know." He came up to the office, he was crying, he said, "It's changed our lives, and why? Why did you do that?" He really wanted to know why. I said, "Well, it's because God loves you so much. And he loves you so much, he wanted your family to be whole, and so he put it inside of us to do that. And so I can't help it. I want to." It's like, I hope you like it.
Success to me is if people are looking towards God and are drawing closer to him because of my life. I have had a successful life. Simply that.
So, I started off with that one bag. And for me, it ended up being the best bag in the whole world. Like the greatest, coolest bag in the whole world. But when I started Saddleback Leather, it was to reach people. Because, man, my life is super short here. I am not going to waste my time.
Well, good morning and welcome. Hope you enjoyed that, showing about how the Lord is Lord of all of life and death, for that matter as well, in that video. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Craig. I'm one of the pastors, and I just, on behalf of the church, Grace Church, want to welcome you and say thanks for joining us today for this conference. Also, thank you for the many who are watching online, many who plan to be here, but as the health reports are strolling in, we're finding that a number of folks were unable to make it because of illness, COVID, etc. So thanks for those of you watching online. It's great to have you with us as well. Especially we want to welcome you if you're a guest. There's a number of folks, you're not an attender at Grace Church, but you heard about this event or someone invited you and you've come. We especially want to say thanks to you for being here, that you would give half your day on a Saturday to come and learn with us. It's really our thrill to host you, and I hope you will feel welcomed here during the seminar today. If we can help in any way, just ask. One maybe important thing is you just came in. If you just came in, there's breakfast served, so you're welcome to get up at any time and get that. And then over here to my right are our restrooms. If you need to use the restroom, that's where you can just go right out over there, and that's where you will find them. Well, as a church, this year, our ministry theme has been discovering our place in God's mission, discovering our place in God's mission. And so we thought, as a way to kick off 2022, it would be wonderful to launch into the calendar year with a fresh focus on how all of life is connected under the reign of Christ, and to see how all of life is important and all of life is meaningful. So we're thrilled to have Steve Garber here to teach us about that. Before I introduce Steve, though, I do want to thank the person who is the heart and soul behind this conference, this seminar, and that is our friend Bob Hughes. And it is with great sorrow that I report that Bob is not here today, because Thursday he tested positive for COVID and had to pull out for this weekend. And so if you know Bob and his passion for the seamless life, his passion for this subject matter, his vision to live this sort of life, then you know how disappointing that is for him and for us as well. And you may be here because you were accosted by Bob in the lobby on a Sunday morning, and he graciously and kindly instructed you to be here. So many of you are here because of that, and then he didn't show. So you feel free next week to give him a lot of grief about getting you in a headlock to be here when he wasn't here himself. All joking aside, Bob has had a profound influence on our pastoral team and our whole church in terms of a vision for living an integrated life around the gospel, and so we miss him today for sure. He was recently sharing with us in a staff meeting about his own journey and how he began to immerse himself in studying the topic of vocation. And as he began to study the topic of vocation, he reported to us that everyone he was reading and everyone that he met in discussing the topic was referencing a teacher, a leader named Dr. Steve Garber. And he said that he wanted to meet this gentleman because he wanted to know who was it that was influencing the people that were directly influencing him. And so ultimately he was able to meet Steve and begin a friendship with him, and that's why ultimately Steve is with us today. We are very honored to have Steve with us, that he would take his weekend and be with us as well. Bob, yesterday, I don't know if it was the COVID or what, but he described to me Steve as the Yoda of faith and vocation. So I don't know if you've been introduced that way, but today we have the Yoda of faith and vocation with us. We're honored to have Dr. Garber with us. He's taught in numerous contexts, most recently as professor of marketplace theology and director of the Masters in Leadership Theology and Society program at Regent College in Vancouver, British Columbia. For many years before that, he was the principal of the Washington Institute for Faith, Vocation, and Culture. He's an author. We have a number of his books out there, and you were provided a copy of the excellent book, Visions of Vocation. I think you're going to be really encouraged by that book. I was able to communicate to Steve what I appreciated about that book. So many things. I've recently read it. So many things about the content of that book. But when you read that book, what you're going to see, I think, comes through from Steve, and just having a little bit of time to get to know him last night over dinner, it was very evident to me, is that he's not only a man that loves great ideas and beautiful ideas and true ideas. He's an idea man for sure, but he doesn't just love ideas, he loves people. And what is so apparent in the book is he retells the stories of people who have made a difference as they have lived a seamless life, a life for the glory of God. All of life sought to connect all of life for the glory of God. He tells their stories personally and gives such dignity to what we might view as the ordinary life, but such dignity when it's lived for the glory of God and the love of others. As he communicated about that, it's so clearly that he knows people, loves people, is close to people. And so to be a man who deeply loves the truths of Scripture, the truths of God's Word, but also loves people. And just getting time with him last night was so clear. He expressed his heart as a man who loves God and loves people. So he'll be bringing 3 talks to us today, and interspersed with them we'll have a break and also some opportunities to talk around our tables. So if you are at a table with only a few of you, at the end of his talk, or even right now, you might want to join a table that has more folks, because we'll have a little bit of discussion. So that'd be great if you could make that move perhaps at the end of his talk as we break to have some discussion. So if you join me, let's welcome Dr. Steve Garber to come present to us today.
He's a good man.
Oh, thank God. I agree.
Thank you very much, Greg. Sometimes, of course, we meet really good people, don't we? And it's hard not to just think, you are a good person, aren't you? And I think meeting this good man last night and having a wonderful meal together, I told my wife last night, he's a good man, really. And thank you for your kindness to me. And all of you for your kindness to me and for your hospitality. I suppose different parts of the world are known for different kinds of things, and Texas, of course, is big Texas, and it's the Republic of Texas, and all of those things. But there's a hospitality among you, which is a gift to me and to people from all over. So it isn't a surprise that you came from San Diego, I guess, is it? Because were met with people who said, yeah, welcome, and thank you for welcoming me here, too. Well, I've got 3 presentations to make, and I've simply put them all under the banner of Our Story, My Story. Our Story, My Story. And it is this imagery of learning to read the Word and to read the world at the very same time. Some years ago, I was invited to speak at a gathering kind of like this, but differently done, in Houston, Texas, outside, really about probably an hour north of the city. But I was picked up at the airport and driven by some Rice University students to this retreat center. And Houston's a big, big place, isn't it? It's, I don't know how it relates in terms of Dallas, but it's a big city too. And I remember just being impressed in the best sort of way with maybe the 10 lanes on the freeway that I was being driven on, thinking, it's that big? Look at that, And all of a sudden, I was being driven in a student's car, I think, up to this place, and beside the car roared by a pickup truck. The back of the pickup truck, it had these immemorable words: American by birth, Texan by the grace of God. And I thought, well, there is where I am, aren't I? So, American by birth and Texan by the grace of God. The 3 presentations are going to be about the questions what and why and how. What and why and how. So this first one, what? The whole of my life, whole of life and my life. The whole of life and my life. If there's anybody who we all would remember and ought to learn from, it is this man called St. Augustine from 1,500 years ago. Story he wrote himself, really the first autobiography that we have in the history of the world. Augustine wrote, and he simply called it Confessions. Confessions. It had been read and read and read by thousands and hundreds of thousands all over the world over these many, many years now. But as a boy, his mother prayed for him. He had no interest in God and the gospel, and went off to university and became a professor and had a dissolute life. He was a brilliant person, but had a wandering life, prone to wander as we are, he was. And there's a strange, wonderful moment of grace in his life where he hears a little song being sung over a wall, and maybe you know the story of him coming to repentant faith through all of that, and becoming really the teacher for the church for most of its history now. All over the world, Augustine is our teacher. But if there's anything which was at the heart of Augustine's insight, his understanding of God and what it means to be a human being in God's world, it was this idea of the ordering of our loves. The ordering of our loves. What's it about? Well, it fundamentally is the question, what do you care about? What do you care about? I'm a father of 5 children, and of course, they're all different from each other, and they're all adults now, but I would say that watching them grow over time, there was probably with each of them along the way the moment where somebody said, he's so boring, or that's so boring. And I hated those words. And I try not to hate my kids for saying them, but I hated the words. And I would always try to push back in some way, trying to engage them and help them to grow up into the world by saying, no, you just haven't learned to ask the right question yet. Because if you learn to ask the right question, there's nobody who's like that, actually. And so I wanted to begin to see, in fact, that one good question you could always ask somebody, anywhere you were, was when it seemed like the right time in the conversation, so what do you care about? On airplanes and restaurants and walking along the ways of the world. It isn't like it's somehow always just those few words to say, what do you care about? But you see, somehow to get at, so who are you then? Who are you? Because I don't think maybe there are some people who just don't want to be known, and that's a tragedy and heartache in itself. Most of us want to be listened to. Most of us want to be taken seriously. Most of us want to have somebody out say, well, I'd like to know more about you, actually. We're just made that way, I think. And Augustine's great insight into you and to me and to human beings all over the face of the earth was that, in fact, we order our cares, we order our affections, we order our loves. And that's at the heart of what it means to be a human being, is that we order our loves. We order our loves. What do you care about? What do you care about? It's not so many days since Christmas. In fact, if you celebrate the 12 days of Christmas, we just finished it a couple days ago. But if there's a story which rings its way across the world year after year after year, it is the story by Charles Dickens called A Christmas Carol. What is the story about? Well, There's a name, of course, we know, Ebenezer Scrooge. We know a name called Tiny Tim, don't we? But the story really is about Augustine's insight into you and to me, into human beings. Because the story really is about the ordering of Ebenezer Scrooge's loves, isn't it? That's the long, dark night of his soul. His being willing, being able. Does he want to? Does he have ears to hear? Does he have eyes to see? Actually, the question, what do you care about, Ebenezer Scrooge? And how did it happen along the way where, in fact, your cares became so disordered along the way? How did they become so disordered along the way? If you remember that tender, poignant moment along the story where Belle, who was the first love of Ebenezer, and she meets him along the road, and he's walked away. He's kind of lost his first love, as we might say. She says to him with these words, "I've seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?" Belle says to Ebenezer, "I've seen it, nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you." And you can see that in terms of the ordering of loves, that the businessman, which is a good thing to be in the world. We've just seen a story of people who are business people in Mexico and now all over the world living in Fort Worth. It's a good thing to be in the world, to contribute to the marketplaces of history. But you see, for Ebenezer, from that moment here and here and here, he becomes, what is he, 27, 28, 29 years old by now? And he's lost his first love. He's put another love in front of it, actually. And it's the love of gain, Well, what is the story about? It is these visits all over the course of the night, this one, and finally this one. And each one, Ebenezer has a question before him. So what do you care about, Ebenezer? Why did you care about this like that? And can you see the consequences of having, in fact, made this choice and this choice and this choice? Can you see that, Ebenezer? And finally, that very darkest of the moment of his long night, and it's death at death's door. And have you seen this? Have you ever considered this? In fact, look at this, Ebenezer. And of course, he's trembling and he's quivering by that point. And finally, in the great graces of all of history and all of literature, he wakes up and realizes, in fact, that he didn't die after all. And he opens that great, wonderful window into the world and says, I'm still alive, Did you see that great big turkey, that big goose, that big bird on the marketplace? Well, go get it, really, And of course, all of life seems to have changed for him. And interestingly, what Ebenezer Scrooge says to us is that I shall live in the past, the present, and the future. Ebenezer Scrooge, by putting it in those terms, is choosing the great story through this long, dark night of his soul, seeing that a good life, an honest life, needed to be about more than me and mine. Maybe you know the films by Pixar, maybe the most wonderfully imaginative, creative film studio we've ever thought about. But story by story by story, not only do the 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds love these stories, but you and I do too. It's an amazing thing, really, to make a story like that. How would you draw every 5-year-old in the world into wanting to watch the film Cars umpteen times? You think, again today? Then, of course, when I see it, I think, you are brilliant, aren't you? This is a brilliantly imagined story, actually. But what is the Pixar heartbeat? I would say it's to reflect on who we are as human beings, who we really are as human beings. One of my teachers, Walker Percy, put it this way, memorably, that bad books lie. They lie most of all about the human condition. He teases this out in an argument that I have found fascinating, that bad books lie about who we are as human beings. And so in a certain sense, we don't really want to listen to stories like that much, actually. We're sort of put off by if you think, that's not the way it is. It isn't the way that I am. It isn't the way the people I know really live like. They don't think that way. They're not really like that, are they? It isn't really who we are as people. I would say what remarkably, in terms of the genius imagination of Pixar and company, has been that they have an ability to speak to 4, 5, 6, 27-year-olds and 35 and 55-year-olds again and again about who we are. And we think, yes, I understand that one. I get who that one is. Think about these two films, especially Cars and Soul. Cars and Soul. What are they about? Well, remember St. Augustine of Hippo. They're about the ordering of loves all over again, aren't they? I was surprised because you see that insight is true to who we are as human beings. It's who we are. We order and disorder our loves. In Augustine's language, sometimes it was the word affections, the ordering of affections, the ordering of disordering of affections. What's Cars about? Well, what does Lightning McQueen begin the story? In this great big, end of the year, big race. And of course, he's so full of himself, that eventually even says, I don't even need a crew. This is about me. It's about my life, And of course, those are words hanging, in our imaginations throughout the rest of the story. Because he gets in the big truck going across America to the now rescheduled final big race of the year 1 week later, bumping along its way along Route 66 or I-40, I suppose, as it became along the way. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, and the truck door opens and he bumps out and finds himself, where of all places, Radiator Springs, someplace out in the great deserts of Arizona. Not imagining a world like that ever before, he finds himself being drawn in day by day, hour by hour, slowly by slowly, into a life he never ever thought existed, in fact. We had more time, I would show you a clip or 2 or 5 from this story and think, isn't that just amazing what they've done here? It's just so beautiful and so creative and it's so winsome and it's so, yes, it is like that, isn't it really? As he meets, this guy and this one and this one and this one, you think, boy, oh boy. What's he being drawn into? Well, you see, understanding the fact that the world's about more than just me. In fact, deeply, profoundly, it's about being part of a community of people. It's about a people in a place, in fact. The people in the place called Radiator Springs. And there is this, and there's this one, and there's this one. And there's the wonderful drive up into the mountains, and the conversation with the pretty little sports car, and and her saying to him, well, I had a big life, you see, but I really wanted more out of life than just that. Other things mattered to me, and he sort of, flippantly says, oh, a little red roadster, no, you missed the whole point, actually. It wasn't that at all. It was really, I wanted a bigger life than that. I wanted more things to matter to me than just that. And then there's that great moment at the end of the story where he gets to the final big race in L.A. and, the hundreds of thousands are in the stands and they're cheering and he's gone around scores of times around the track and ready to win at the very last minute. And all of a sudden he sees over his head that somebody he respects a lot has been bumped off the track. And he screeches right before the end of the finish line and goes back in, picks up the guy, pushes him over across the end of the track. And you see, if you have eyes to see, dear people, ears to hear, what do we see in that? Well, you see, it's possible to give up your own life and to actually gain your life. There's no Bible verse here. There's no sort of quoting, and Jesus did say after all, didn't he? But you see, what Pixar does so beautifully is it gets at into what I would call, the truths of what it means to be a human being. Because you see, the truth of what it means to be a human being are the truths of what it means to be a holy being. Because to be truly holy is to be truly human. That's the deep insight here. What Pixar does in a film like Cars, it slips back into, surprisingly, St. Augustine's own great work and says, how are you going to order your lives? If Cars is about that, think about the more recent film Soul. If I were to use one word to describe this film, it's a good word for a morning like this. It's about the idea of vocation. Here's a jazz pianist, always going to be a jazz pianist ever since his father first played him a little record of jazz music, and he got entranced and began to think about it and dream about it and work for it. And he ends up teaching band to high school music students, and they are dissonant and discordant, and he can't hardly stand to be there, but he's committed to being there, and he doesn't want to be there. He really wants to be playing his jazz at night, in a club. And then all of a sudden he gets invited to do this by strange circumstance, and he's ready to have a whole life change finally. And I won't go into the whole story to ruin it for you, but you see, all of a sudden we're involved in a strange cosmos. And you think, it is like that? And of course, who knows? And even Pixar doesn't quite know. The man who wrote the screenplay for this is the head of Pixar, actually. And he is, by confession, a true, honest Christian person. But he's not out to make what we might call parochially a Christian film for Christian people to watch. He wants to make a film for everyone, everywhere. A story for everyone, everywhere. And so he imagines, well, how would we wrestle with this? And you see with Walker Percy's insight, bad books lie. They lie most of all about the human condition. Bad films lie. They lie most of all about the human condition. What is soul about? Well, it's about somebody who's asking the question from beginning to end, what do I care about? Who am I anyway? What's really going to be important to me in my life? I've always been sure it was this, in fact. And so for much of the film, it's really like, but I'm supposed to do this. I was born to do this. He's sure, really. And the film is a pilgrimage into his own long, dark night of his soul, I suppose. And he begins to wonder, finally, and thinking, maybe it wasn't that after all. Maybe actually there were other things I ought to have cared about in a different kind of a way in my life. Maybe that would actually give me a healthier, a happier life. I would say, of course, a more holy life too. As he begins to order his own soul in a way which, in fact, is more true to the way he was made to be by God himself. That's the story of the film. Intriguingly called Soul, written by a man who loves God like you do, who could finally easily find his way into a church like this, actually, by his own confession of what he believes to be true about the universe. But he's trying to tell a story for everyone, everywhere. And that matters, I would say. It matters deeply. There are 3 films that are born of your great state of Texas that I wanted to put into the context of our conversation this morning. And there are the films Tender Mercies and A Boy's Life and The Tree of Life. I wonder, have you seen 1 or 2 or 3 of these films in the room here? Some of you have. But Tender Mercies won an Academy Award some years ago, set in the middle part of Texas, someplace far, far away from the burgeoning empire that's Frisco these days. But a long highway and a small little motel along the way, and Robert Duvall, characteristically wonderfully gifted as an actor, is a sort of worn down, worn out country western singer. And he begins to drink too much, and he sort of lost his way and lost his family and lost the things that had mattered most to him in his life. And of course, it's a story of him meeting somebody who remarkably embodies the gospel to him and offers him, in fact, a different way to imagine his life. And, 2/3 of the way through the story, we're thinking, Robert Duvall, this guy, Max Sledge, is actually doing what? He's in a choir now in a little Baptist church in this little town. And he's singing a song of praise to God. And you think, this is a song and a film and a story that won the Academy Award for the best of the year, really? Tender Mercies, it's called. But you see, it too is a story about the ordering of loves. It's about somebody who assumed that, in fact, that if I could just achieve this much fame out of the ambitions of my heart, I'm about this is who I am, and I will do this until the day I die. Then, of course, before he dies, other people die in his life, and he begins to have his own dreams die and implode on his own heart, and he realizes, in fact, he's at the end of a road. And what's he going to do? He can, in fact, just go deeper, deeper down into a disordered life, a life of disordered loves. Or he could, in fact, be willing to think again about, in fact, what it might mean to order my loves, to order my life in a way which would be more healthy to me, more happy for me, in fact, more holy as a human being. If Tender Mercy is about that, its own story of heartache as it is, well, the film A Boy's Life, Boyhood, is about that too. It's a strange, strange film if you know it at all, but it took about 12 years to film this, set in Texas also. But the filmmaker decided, I want to tell the story of somebody from being this big to being this big. And so for 12 years, he actually films this boy's life. Boyhood, it's called. And there's disarray, and there's sorrow, and there's hope, and there's more disarray, and there's more sorrow, and there's more hope, and it's all bungled up together. But at the very end, he goes off to one of your great universities in the western part of the state, and rather than finding a way to order his loves wholly and fully, it's just a moment of great, great sorrow and despair and anxiety and alienation, just thinking, this is it finally, and you find your way after 3 hours of watching this film thinking, I hate stories like this. Really. But it's a story of heartache too. So there's 2 heartache stories. Well, The Tree of Life is its own story of heartache, done by an Austin, Texas filmmaker, probably I don't use this kind of language for most days of my life, and none of us have to, but there is a phrase called a film auteur. It's more French, and I'm not very French at all in my life, but it's sort of like if you're a greatly gifted filmmaker, you might be called an auteur, A-U-T-E-U-R. He is the best of the best in the world right now. Terence Malek is his name, lives in Austin. When he took this film, The Tree of Life, to the Cannes Festival in the south of France 10 years ago, it won the gold prize, the blue ribbon of the best film in the year by the best filmmakers in the world gathering together to watch and judge and make judgment decisions about. His film was judged to be the best of the best in the world. It's all filmed in Waco, actually, just to kind of keep it local a little bit here for you. But it's a story of a family with 4 chapters to the story. And the 4 chapters are what? Well, they're the chapters that in biblical faith we call creation, fall, redemption, and consummation. 4 great moments, 4 great periods, 4 great chapters in the story. It's the story of creation, fall, redemption, and consummation. And a story like that did what? It earned what kind of prize? It won the best prize, the top prize for the best film in the world for the whole world. You think, so how'd you do this, Terence Malek? And who are you? And what's this story about? Well, it's a story of its own heartache. And I would just say, dear brothers and sisters, that there isn't a person in the room who doesn't know that story, right? I know some of you, I don't know most of you. But I'm just sure if we had a chance to talk more fully right now, I would just be able to walk around the table. If you felt comfortable with me, probably you would never do that today. But if you knew me well enough, we could actually have a truer conversation. And I scratched a little bit, and you were willing to be scratched a little bit. You too would have your own disappointment that you live with all day long, your own heartache all day long, your own sorrow all day long. It's just true of life in a wounded, broken, fallen world. We cannot live very long without that being true for all of us, really. So when I see a film, I don't require they all be stories of sadness. That's not my point at all. But it intrigues me that these 3 very good films in their own terms, set in Texas, are all stories of heartache. But they're differently responded to. The heartache means something different in each of the stories. And finally, this Tree of Life story situates, death, alienation, hurt, anger, more hurt, but situated in a story about, in fact, the way the world actually is, from beginning to end, from creation to consummation. Each of these, of course, is a Texas story. Each one a story of heartache, but deep differences about its meaning. Deep differences about the meaning of meaning, in fact. What do we do with the world, people? What do we do with the world? How do we all respond to the world that we have to live in day by day? In some ways, of course, it's not a very far away question from. So, seeing what you see, knowing what you know, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? And you see, if we can poke a little bit more deeply with each one of us, we would find, in fact, the way we respond to that question is born out of what we care about. In fact, how we order our cares, how we order our affections, how we order our loves. There's a place that has thought about these questions now for 60 years with remarkable insight and wonder, and you really did it like this. It's a place in the hill country of Texas called Laity Lodge. If you got on the highway going west out of San Antonio, going past Kerrville eventually, and then finally you took this road here, and then this road here, and all of a sudden there you find down a long dirt road. You actually have to drive through a river for about a mile, actually. I'm not teasing you. You have to drive through a river for about a mile. And it's almost like a baptismal experience, because your tires get in the water, and the car's in the water, your truck's in the water, and you just go on and on and on. It isn't like it's overwhelming water, but it's like deep enough to be water. And you're in the water, and it's up a limestone, canyon, and the Rio Frio finds its way through. And then you get off and you come up another dirt road, and you see this limestone, sign. Limestone buildings all around you here, of course, because that's what we do in Texas. But limestone sign marker that says Laity Lodge. Laity Lodge. You have been watching, some of you will watch again, the story of Reframe, this 10-part film series. It was actually an idea that was begun formally at Laity Lodge some years ago. I was there for a retreat and, met a guy, and he was from someplace else, and We said we should talk to each other, have about breakfast Sunday morning over these 3 or 4 days together, arrange for that. Within about an hour, I suppose, I said to him, and I don't use this language hardly ever in my life, but I said, this is a holy moment, isn't it? And he looked at me and said, I think you're right. And we spent the next 2 hours talking about an idea to make a film series, exploring these questions of who am I, who are we, what's the story in the world all about, that in fact it gives shape and substance to who we ought to be as people in the world. After some weeks, I suppose, we decided to name this project the Reframe series. We would do it like this. We would actually interview people from all over the world. We would have teachers teaching, but we would have it be fixed on these great questions so that I've put these 3 sessions under the banner of for this morning. Our story, my story. So what is the great, great big story of the world, of all of life? What's my story going to mean in the light of that great big story? How's this going to work out, actually? If you know anything about Laity Lodge, maybe you know that it's actually brought into being by the HEB folks, good people that they are all over the state of Texas. Even Walmart can't compete in Texas with HEB, can they? It just doesn't work. Why is that? Well, last winter when the great, great ice storm hit Texas and the whole state was like, ah! What are we going to do? Well, the loudspeakers, of course, in the HEB stores of Texas announced people walking through with the lights having gone down and, shopping carts full of groceries. The loudspeaker said, we know you're here, we know you're our friends, and we're your friend too, so just take what you need today, go out to your cars, and then come back someday and we'll figure it out, Why was it that way? Because you see, for over 120 years basically now, the unfortunately named Butt family have been selling groceries to Texans. And people trust HEB, don't they? And even now with a little, Whole Foods market on steroids called Central Market, a whole different way to imagine buying from the HEB people. But in the article in the New York Times, the top of the full story last winter when the ice storm had descended upon Texas and Texas froze, a guy was quoted in the article by saying, well, HEB is like the moral center of Texas, aren't they? Now, we could talk about that. I probably won't pursue it much more than that today with you right now. But Laity Lodge was formed out of these questions of who am I and what is the world really all about? Howard E. Butt Sr. was the son of the man and the woman who first began to sell groceries out of their living room in Kerrville, Texas in the early 1900s. But over the course of his life, he began to sell enough groceries to enough people that they had some philanthropic, imagination in mind, like what could we do with the money we have to be stewards of? And the idea came to them sort of surprisingly that maybe we could buy a ranch in the hill country west of Kerrville. And we could build a free camp, they called it. For kids who couldn't afford to go to camp, they could come to our camp and they would just say, you don't have to be, rich and mighty to go to camp in the summer in Texas. You can come to our camp along the Rio Frio. We're just going to call it the free camp, so please come. And thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of kids have come over the years. About 20,000 kids a year come through the free camps now, 60 years later. There are probably 5 or 6 of them now along the same Rio Frio Canyon there. But in that same period of discussion time about what they do with this place, Howard E. Butt Jr. was a Baylor student, and he had been given by God a gift for evangelism. And he became friends with Billy Graham. They were both about the same age, and both had an idea that maybe the gospel could be delivered in this kind of a more big venue kind of a way, and began to do crusades together. And of course, for Howard Butt, the great question of his life was, well, how am I going to respond to the call of God by my Father in heaven to be an evangelist, when my Father on earth wants me to be a businessman? A great, great tension in his life. And for the next 10 years, I would say, if he was still alive, he would say, it was the great, great crisis moment in my life. I didn't know what to do. I love my father. I honor my father. He thought business was my life for the rest of my life. I was sure was to be an evangelist. What am I going to do, actually? And his parents, I was not there for the conversation, but he and his mom and dad decided that he could have a little bit of this property and build something that he wanted to build to address his own crisis. He called it the Laity Lodge. To do what? To be a place where, in fact, people could come and think about these deep questions of who am I and who am I in the world? What's my life supposed to be all about, actually? What's the relationship between this great, great story of God in the world and my story and my life? Between our story and my story. And that was Howard Butt's own place. It was actually the beginning of the Laity Lodge. Along the way of Howard Butt's life, he began to be somebody who wanted to become as theologically mature as he was professionally competent. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? And he chose to have as his friend and conversation partner the great theologian J.I. Packer. And so every year for 60 years, Howard Butt and J.I. Packer got together just to talk. To talk and to talk and to talk about what? About who God is, who we are, what's this world actually like, what's this situation ought to be, how it should be worked out, Dr. Packer, or Jim, I'm sure as he was to Howard. They became dear, deep friends, a friendship that was sustained for 60 years. One of the great moments in my whole life, I actually thought when it was done, I could just die and go to heaven myself. I was invited by the Laity Lodge people to come speak one summer 6-7 years ago with Dr. Packer at one of the retreats at Laity Lodge. I remember thinking, well, I could just die now, really, because I had such a respect for this man. I had such an affection for him. I thought, well, this is a great, great gift to me, even to be in the same room with him like this for a while. But it's intrigued me, Butt able to, in some ways, do anything he wanted, go anywhere he wanted. There were no restrictions in some ways on his life that way. But he chose, in fact, to be serious enough about his own sense of calling, his own sense of life, his own sense of purpose, his own sense of vocation, to say, written into the meaning of my life, I'm going to be somebody who actually, year by year by year, keeps the conversation going with a man who says it's not the same thing to know about God as it is to know God. If you really want to be who you're supposed to be in this life, Howard, you have to be somebody who not just knows all these things about God, but in fact really know God. I remember many years ago being in a room with Dr. Packer when I had little kids in our family life, and he was already somebody that I thought very highly of, and my kids were with me, and they were 3 and 5 and 7 or something like that, and I remember him getting down. He was kind of a taller man at that time in his life, to me it seemed, and he got down on his haunches, kind of like this, eye level with my little kids, and he said to each of them by name, I just want you to know that the most important thing in the whole world is that you grow to be a man, a woman who knows God. I've treasured those words in my heart really for years and years of my life now, to having said those things to my kids. But you see, he said the very same things to Howard Butt in his own way, in a different kind of a way, of course, in a relationship with a colleague, a peer, a kindred spirit. You see, it's one thing to be somebody who is really good at what you do in the world, professionally competent, but would you be somebody who actually is theologically mature as you are professionally competent? Who isn't just living for the rest of it with a high school faith, but you've actually gone on to the years beyond and beyond and beyond that, to deepened insight, deepened conviction, deepened commitment. Could you be somebody like that actually in your life? Those who come in and out of the Laity Lodge will often describe it, if they have any access to words like this or images like this, as a thin place. Now, it's an interesting, unusual image, actually, a thin place. This actually is a photo I took last fall there in the late afternoon light, which is probably some of the best light to take photos in, because it's just, you just see things differently in the afternoon light, don't you, if you are watching. And the river, the Rio Frio, runs through this limestone canyon, and you can see down into it from way up high. It's that clear. It's limestone after all. And you can see these big, huge, I'm not kidding you, like big, huge turtles like this swimming down through the water, And this is not a fish story. You can see catfish that are like this, really, in the water. And they're just going like this. And, you think, they're really there, aren't they? They're that big, But then in late afternoon light, when the limestone looks this way and the light comes on it in a certain kind of way, it's just remarkably, unusually beautiful. And people who have access to this imagery sometimes will say, it's a thin place, isn't it? And they mean a thin place where heaven and earth actually touch each other. Now, it's nothing because Mr. Butt or the Butt family or the HEB people have said, we're trying to be something, and impress you with something. And it's like there's a remarkable, differently done than you folks, but a remarkable hospitality at the very heart of the Laity Lodge. When you walk in, you just think, you're going to be that kind to me? You're so glad to see me, really? And the whole idea is to take me in. It isn't a great big conference center. It's a place for about 70 people to come and think more deeply about what? About where heaven and earth touch each other in the course of life, of an ordinary life. A thin place, a thin place. Over the years of Laity Lodge's existence, they've taken the arts quite seriously, interestingly. So on the grounds of the property, again, it's not a great big place, but just beautifully imagined. There's a couple little workshops down by the river that are called the art houses. And they do art like this. And every weekend somebody comes in to help those who come on the retreat to step into some kind of creative work. It could be tie-dyeing, it could be, sculpting little something or making a little wooden spoon out of, piece of wood, or it could be all kinds of things, really. But they also bring in a musician, typically, every weekend, a professional musician, somebody oftentimes from Nashville, but it doesn't have to be that. Mostly they're musicians from Nashville, people who are gifted by God with professional abilities that in some ways a wider world says, thank you, that's very, very good, isn't it, really? And this past fall, when I was speaking there, a dear woman, a good woman named Sandra McCracken was also part of the weekend retreat. And so we did this together, and I think the world of her music. But the evening that we had together on Saturday night when she did a little in-house concert, she's just so good at what she does, isn't it, if you know her music. I'm sure most of you probably sing to her music, day by day, week by week. And she's that good, but we're drawn to her music. Why? Well, there's a richness about her music. And you think, so why is that, Sandra? Well, in this concert, over the course of an hour and a half, she talked about the influence of Francis Schaeffer on her music, the influence of Bono, of U2 on her music, the influence of Wendell Berry, the writer, on her music, the influence of the Russian Orthodox theologian Alexander Schmemann on her music. I'm thinking, Sandra, I know you, I do know you, and I think the world of you, but naturally, normally, just in an ordinary way, talking about these different influences on how she imagines the work of a musician. And you can see that, in fact, that Sandra McCracken, in her own way, is somebody who's become as theologically mature as she is professionally competent. She's very good musically, a very gifted musician, just remarkably so. But there's a theological maturity about her that I would say draws the whole world in, if you have ears to hear, that is. Differently done, I've met a woman there. In fact, the very same weekend I met Bob, a few years ago when he came to a retreat there. Bob Hughes. There was a woman named Allison Beadle. She is from that great university called Texas A&M, and she did food science there and food marketing and all kinds of things like that. And she graduated. She got working for who? For Central Market. It's a good job to get out of A&M with a degree like she had. And she did work there for a number of years, got enough competencies along the way to begin to think, maybe I could take what I've learned here and imagine a different way to offer my skills and hopes to the world. And she created a company called Wild Hive. And you can see these words up there, Wild Hive, and the whole idea of it, is, of course, is to be, a company that helps the Texas pecan growers, cattle ranchers in Texas, and blueberry growers in Washington State, and associations of farmers in different kinds of ways who sell different kinds of products to come together as associations to actually market more completely and fully and honestly and helpfully to the wider world. That's Allison's work these days. Wild Hive, she calls it. It's impressive to me, just getting to know Allison over the last few years now, to find her to be somebody in a very different way than Sandra, but somebody who's deeply, thoughtfully, purposely committed to becoming as theologically mature as she is professionally competent. She and I correspond about things, write about things. I say to her about doing this. She says, "Of course, I'll do that with you." And becoming somebody who's become a friend to me, somebody who I respect for her own commitment to a more serious discipleship, to becoming somebody, I'll just put it again for the 18th time, who is as theologically mature as she is professionally competent. There's no distinction between. There's no difference between. There's those people who care about those things are over there. People who care about those things, of course, go over there. But how would you be in one and the same person, somebody who could learn to read the Word and to read the world at the same time? To have a certain kind of competency that allows you to be somebody with a seamless life, a coherent life, a life where what we believe about the world honestly forms the way we live in the world. Threaded through all of that hope, though, I will offer you a word for this morning. We'll revisit it again before the day is done, is the reality of the proximate. The proximate. I won't spend the whole morning on this because it's about the seamlessness of life. But I would say that we could be people with all the seriousness of heart that God would be honored by in our lives. But none of us, as serious, as gifted as we are going to be people who find our way to it all being done when all is said and done. I had a breakfast with, a couple of the Laity Lodge people this fall, in San Antonio before I went out for the weekend. They're the leaders of the whole thing there, and part of the HEB, heritage quite deeply in their own different ways. But as we talked, of course, I'm poking away. They're telling me things they want me to understand and respond to, and it's intriguing to me to find, well, HEB, the moral center of Texas. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, actually. But then you also realize that there's pushes and there's shoves and there are things you think, oh, if this could be just agreed upon here and we could just decide, in fact, to be on the same page here, and then wouldn't it all be? And then you realize, of course, that, even people in places where it all seems to be so wonderfully done, even in fact, a place like a thin place like this, you think, but there's still a longing for more, isn't there? Why? Because in this now but not yet world we live in, it's the proximate we have to make peace with. And the proximate's about what? It's about making peace with something that's honest and true and right, even if you don't get access to everything, even if everything is not yours to, in fact, to have in this life. Could you make peace with something that's honest, something that's true, something that's real? Could you make peace with a proximate marriage? Proximate happiness in your marriage? Or are you going to require, in fact, that it all be wonderfully, completely perfect in your marriage? I give homilies for weddings every once in a while to people who I've come to love. My wife says, you always say the same thing, Steve. I say, no, it's always very, very different, really. She says, no, you say the same thing. And I suppose the same thing is I've tried to somehow honor the wonder of the day and the beauty of the day and the glory of the day in some kind of, in my mind at least, a very, very creative, unique kind of a way. But I always want to say before it's all said and done, but would you be willing to make these promises today if you knew that somehow by God's grace in 25 years you would have found proximate happiness in your marriage? An honest happiness, a true happiness, a real happiness. It won't be perfect because it isn't perfect in this life any of us ever have access to. I've been in Washington, D.C. for a long time, and I got asked by a magazine in Canada some years ago, would you write an essay for us about, is there a vocation in the political world? And I thought, oh, well, I hope there is. And I gave an essay that I called eventually Making Peace with Proximate Justice. And I basically said, if you're going to stay here and stay in the political push and shove, the sausage-making world that it always is, you're going to have to make peace with proximate justice, with some justice, something that's honest and right and true. You won't get everything, Healthcare, welfare reform, education, a relationship to China, to Israel, to wherever it's going to be in the world. I mean, it won't all happen, really. So would you be willing to work hard for something that's true? So what I say to you, dear people, at the end of this first session in the morning, I'm arguing for a coherent life, a seamless life. I'm not a romantic about this. I am the man all day long who cries out to God and acknowledges on some level that I'm prone to wander. Oh, Jesus, I so am. I don't want to be, but I am, I know, again today. Would you be merciful to me again this hour, this moment, this day of my life? Because I just don't get it all right, And in no part of life do we get it all right. So even if I offer you this morning in 3 different sessions, the idea of seamlessness, of a coherent life, where what you believe is how you live, and there's actually an honest relationship between the two. I'm not talking to any of you about, somehow when all is said and done at 12:30 we walk out, we think, I'm there, it's all mine. I did it. I believe that now, I hope you can somehow have a heartache longing for seamlessness, but acknowledge at the same time that, in this now but not yet world, this 4-chapter story that the Tree of Life film beautifully tells, it's creation, it's fall, it's redemption and consummation. That in fact, living at life in a world like that, with that big story being the story, that I would long for there to be something about my life that's honorable, something that's true, something that's right. Oh, please, Jesus, be merciful to me, a sinner. Amen. Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit, right?
Do you have a question that is there
We're
a
going to
discussion
put one up
question
here,
for our
I think,
tables?
maybe. Yeah. There for you all to see, I hope. So. What do you care about? Why does ordering our loves matter? How do you respond to the image of being as theologically mature as you are professionally competent? So you can ask and talk about other things too if you want, but I'm just going to sort of leaven the conversation as a way to get started with this question or two. And let's talk for a while, and then I think that I will respond, at a certain point too. Is that right?
Yes. So I think what we'll do here is, were you done, Dr. Garber?
Yes.
Okay. I think what we'll do here is, if you're like Ginger and me, and you're not with very many people or no people, join a table so you can have a conversation. And this is brief. These are profound questions that we're going to talk very briefly about, because in about 20 minutes he's going to do session 2. So talk for about 15 minutes, hit the restroom or get a refill of coffee, and then we'll call you back together at 10:15 for session 2. Got it? Great. Thanks, everybody.